The order landed like a slap in the grey dawn, sharp and final as ice cracking on a metal deck. "Open your coats." Sela's twin heartbeats stumbled out of sync. The air on Rimehold 2 always tasted of recycled cold thin, antiseptic, threaded, with rust from the fence posts and the barracks seams. Around her, 16 other Lyran women stood in a rigid line on the packed grit of the yard, breath fogging through their teeth. Beside Sela, Riven's crest filaments, those ropey, luminous strands that grew from every Lyran's scalp, tightened against her skull in a reflex of fear. Behind them, John's throat made a sound halfway between a whimper and a prayer to gods nobody spoke of anymore. 3 words, 3 simple words that, to captured women on a detention moon, sounded like a sentence with no appeal. The Terran officer who'd spoken stood at parade rest, silver hair catching what little light seeped through the permanent cloud cover. His uniform was storm grey, broken only by a red emblem on his shoulder, 2 angled bars crossing like a warning sign. It meant nothing to the Lyrans, but it felt ominous anyway. 2 more Terrans flanked the entrance to a canvas structure labeled in blocky letters Sela couldn't read from this distance. Sela could, however, read them when she was closer. She'd been a comms analyst aboard the Lyran ship Bright Oath before the ambush in the Sable Passage. 6 years of work had trained her to price sense from encrypted chatter and civilian broadcasts. She'd learned Terran idioms, their humor, their songs and arguments, and nightly news. She knew their history, what victorious armies had done when they believed an enemy wasn't really a person. And she knew what open your coats had meant. More than once, on her homeworld's intercepted archives. "This is it," Riven breathed, voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air. Her violet skin had drained toward grey, the bioluminescent undertone that usually shimmered under Lyran flesh gone flat and dull. Jan shook her head hard, as if she could dislodge the moment. "I can't," she whispered. I can't. "Steady," said Elder Reese, 4th in line. Reese was nearly 60 by Lyran counting. A former diplomat drafted into wartime logistics when the councils ran out of volunteers. Her expression gave nothing away. Show nothing, give them nothing. Captain Vorik's voice echoed in Sela's, memory like a sermon drilled into bone. "Terrans are animals wearing uniforms." He'd insisted during the voyage that became captivity. "They're violent. They've butchered their own kind. They burned cities with split atoms. When they catch monsters, they take trophies." The stories had spread through the cells and corridors. Experiments, medical procedures, things done with calm hands and cold eyes. Rumors moved faster than meals, and fear fed on itself. Sela had tried, once, to argue. She'd told Vorik about Terran dramas she'd intercepted, stories where heroes refused to cross lines, even under threat of defeat, about books and broadcasts obsessed with guilt, redemption, restraint. Vorik had laughed in her face. "Fiction," he'd said. "The lies they tell themselves so they can sleep after they do what they are." Now Sela stood with a coat buttoned up to her throat, feeling as if the fabric was the only wall between her and the worst kind of certainty. The silver-haired officer began walking down the line with a tablet held like a shield. A second Terran followed a half-step behind female. Close-cropped black hair. White outer coat over the same grey uniform. The red emblem was larger on her chest. Medical. Sela realized with a delayed jolt. A medic dot they stopped in front of. Brel, the first prisoner. Brel's hands shook so hard the buttons clicked against each other. "Open your coat, please," the officer repeated, quieter this time, almost gentle. That made Sela's stomach turn more than a shout would have. Brel fumbled, then pulled the coat open. Underneath was the standard grey jumpsuit they'd been issued when they arrived, stiff fabric. Too thin for the moon's chill. Brel closed her eyes. The medic stepped forward and produced a flat device that glowed pale blue. She swept it near Brel's chest, her neck, then down her abdomen in a practiced arc. Nothing happened. No hands lingering where they shouldn't. No leers, no laughter, no sudden violence. The medic tapped her tablet, murmured a few words to the officer, then moved on. Double quotes next. "Please." Sela's mind tried to reject what her eyes were feeding it. The process repeated. Coat open, blue scan, a note. Move along. The guards didn't touch the prisoners unless they had to. And even then it was brief and elbow-guided, a shoulder steadied. Their faces were unreadable in the way professionals' faces often were, not in the way predators' faces were by the time they reached Riven. Sela had begun to wonder if she was cracking. Nothing fit the story Vorik had poured into their heads. "Open your coat, please," the officer said. Riven complied, her filaments hanging limp with resignation. The scanner swept over her. The medic's brow furrowed, actually furrowed, as if concerned. She spoke rapidly to the officer in Terran standard, too fast for Sela to catch every word, but fragments snapped into place, malnourished, anemic. "Supplement now," the officer nodded once. Then he reached into a pocket and withdrew a small foil packet. He held it out toward Riven. Like an offering, Riven recoiled as if it might explode. "Nutrient concentrate," the officer said slowly, enunciating, "for you. Eat." Riven stared at the packet as if it might bite. The officer's mouth tightened. Not anger, something else. Weariness, regret. He set the packet gently on the ground by her boots and moved on. John's turn came, and she had to be held upright by Elder Reese. John's body trembled so violently the coat's fabric quivered like leaves in wind. The medic noticed. Of course, she noticed. She lifted both hands, palms out, a universal gesture of easy, easy. "Okay," she said. And then, surprising Sela, she switched into halting Lyran. No harm, no danger. Health check only. Understand. John made a wet sound that was definitely a sob. The scan was quick, almost perfunctory. Then the medic did something that rearranged Sela's understanding of the universe. She smiled, small, restrained, but unmistakably meant to reassure. "Good," she said in broken Lyran. "Strong. No worry." John broke into quiet, shaking tears. The kind that come when a body realizes it is not about to die. Sela realized she'd been holding her breath and let it rush out in a dizzying exhale. The officer stopped before her. Up close she saw details, lines around his eyes, gray in his brows. an old scar on his chin. Evidence of violence survived, but so did evidence of age and endurance. He waited while Sela steadied her hands. His tablet stayed at his side, not raised like a threat. "Open your coat, please." Sela's fingers found the buttons. Cold air knifed through the jumpsuit when she pulled it open. But the colder thing was inside her, the chill of certainty. Collapsing, the blue scanner passed over her skin. The medic made a small satisfied sound and typed. "Very healthy," she said, in Terran standard. Then, slower, choosing words. "Diet adequate. No infection. No open wounds." Her eyes flicked to the tablet. "Old injury. Shoulder?" She touched just below her own left shoulder. "My arm," Sela said automatically in Terran standard. "Fracture during boarding." The medic's eyebrows lifted. "Yes, healed well." "You had?" Lyran boned it. Sela blinked. "Before capture." "Yes." The medic nodded. "Good technology." Then, startling Sela further, she added in clumsy Lyran, "Your people, clever." She looked directly into Sela's eyes for the first time. Not as a monster, not as a specimen, as a person. "Pain?" the medic asked. "Stiffness?" Sela shook her head, too bewildered to speak properly. The medic smiled again, warmer this time. "Button coat," she advised, gesturing towards Sela's open lapels. "Cold today." And then she was gone. Moving down the line, Sela stood there, with her coat half open, watching. Two more women received nutrient packets. An older engineer, Gara, was pulled aside and escorted toward the tent. Not dragged, not shoved. A guard supported her elbow as if she might fall. Sela waited for the trap to spring, the screams to follow. None came when the screening finished. The silver-haired officer addressed them in thick-accented Lyran. "All prisoners return barracks. Evening meal in 1 hour. Questions tomorrow." Officer desk. And that was it. Dismissal. Dinner. The women drifted back in a slow, disoriented cluster. Jun walked like someone expecting the ground to vanish. Riven turned the nutrient packet over and over in her hands. Reading the Terran label with suspicion. Sela translated quietly. "Emergency high-calorie ration. Rapid absorption. Common in Terran field kits." "Could be drugged," Riven muttered. "Could be food," Sela replied, and heard how strange it sounded to say that as an actual possibility. Elder Reese fell into step beside her. "They're checking for disease and deficiency," she said. "Why?" Jun asked, voice raw. "Why would they care?" "Because sick prisoners die," Reese said. "And dead prisoners can't be exchanged." It was a neat explanation. It was also incomplete. Sela could hear the doubt under Eris's steady tone, the crack in the diplomat's armor. The next morning, Gara returned at dawn looking better. Color had returned to her skin. Her filaments had regained a faint shimmer. "They kept me warm," she reported, as if unsure she'd heard her own words correctly. "Fed me soup. The doctor, Dr. Park, she's cold-checked me every few hours. Gave me supplements for my hearts. Said my rhythm was irregular." John's face tightened in panic. "What did they do to you?" "Nothing," Gara insisted. "That's the point. They noticed a problem I didn't even know I had, and they treated it." Sela listened as if collecting evidence in a case file. It refused to fit the narrative she'd lived inside for years. 3 days later, the announcement came over the barracks system in clear galactic common. Negotiations had produced a prisoner exchange. Non-combat personnel would be repatriated immediately. Combat troops would follow in stages pending verification of a ceasefire. Sela was classified as non-combat. So was Riven. So were most women in their unit comms, medical auxiliaries, navigators, engineers. Captain Vorik raged when the mixed group of prisoners was briefly assembled for a joint briefing. He looked thinner than Sela remembered. His filaments dull with stress, but his certainty remained viciously intact. "It's a trick," he hissed. "They'll send you home to spread propaganda about their kindness. They'll keep the rest and, Captain." The Terran officer, Colonel Hale. Sela had learned cut him off with a voice so tired it was almost gentle. "I've been a soldier for 32 years. I've heard conspiracy theories from prisoners of every species in the registry. You're not special, and frankly, you're not that interesting." Shock rippled through the Lyrans. No one spoke to Vorik that way. "What I am," Hale continued, holding up a paper folder like an artifact from another age, "is exhausted, tired of this moon, tired of war, tired of explaining to frightened people that we don't want to hurt them, when our actual interest is ending this conflict so I can go home and meet my granddaughter. She was born 6 months ago. I've only seen her in pictures." He flipped the folder open. "This is the repatriation schedule. Non-combat personnel leave in 72 hours. Combat personnel follow within the month if your council holds the ceasefire. Exchange point is the neutral station at Palisade 5. A Lyran diplomatic ship is already inbound. And if we refuse," Vorik demanded, "if we suspect treachery, then you stay." Hale said, not threatening, simply stating reality. "You keep getting 3 meals a day, medical care, yard time, until hostilities change or your council offers something else. There's no secret punishment for refusing. Just more of this." He gestured at the barracks, the fences, the grey sky, which I suspect is purgatory enough for everyone. Afterward, Sela stood at the narrow window of her bunk room, staring out at the yard where the medical tent still sat like an accusation against everything she'd believed. "Do you think it's real?" Jun asked softly, joining her. "I think," Sela began, and found the words heavy. "I think I spent 6 years listening to Terrans from a distance, and never asked if the picture in my head matched the people making the noise." Jun frowned. "Humans are afraid of doing bad things. Terrans," Sela corrected automatically. "Then let it go." "Yes, maybe. Their stories. They obsess over lines you shouldn't cross. Over what happens when you decide another person doesn't count." Jun's filaments tightened. "They bond us in this sable passage. We cross the boundary first," Sela said, and felt the confession scorch her throat. "I was monitoring the channel. The order came down. Break the neutral treaty. Establish position inside their sector. They responded to an incursion." Jun stared at her as if Sela had rewritten gravity. Before Jun could speak, the barracks door opened and Colonel Hale stepped in. He looked even more tired than before. Specialist Sela, he said, reading from a list. I'm told you're fluent in Terran standard. Sela stood to quickly. Her pulse roared. Here it was. The reckoning for what she'd done during the war. Yes, sir. Come with me, Hale said. There's something I'd like to discuss. The walk to his office lasted 5 minutes and stole 5 years. Sela's mind spiraled through every atrocity she'd studied. She composed farewell messages to families she might never see again. What awaited her was a chair, a steaming cup of something dark, and Hale's grimace as he took a sip. I hate coffee, he announced. Tastes like burned soil. But it's tradition, and sometimes tradition is all that keeps you from losing your mind. He set the cup down. You're not in trouble. Sela's voice refused to work, so she nodded. I need your help, Hale said. The repatriation is real. But we have a problem. Medical records. We identified several prisoners with conditions that need ongoing treatment: heart rhythm issues, nutritional deficiencies, trauma responses. Our formats don't match yours. If your doctors can't interpret what we treated, people could get hurt. Worst case, die. You want me to translate? Sela managed. I want you to help our medical team create Lyran-compatible documentation for everyone being repatriated, Hale said. You know both languages. You understand context. And you're the only person in this facility both sides seem to trust enough to believe this isn't a plot. Sela stared at him. You're asking me to help you help us. I'm asking you to help me ensure the people we captured don't die of preventable mistakes. After we send them home, Hale said, voice flat with honesty, my victory conditions do not include racking up a body count through bureaucracy. I've got enough ghosts. Silence stretched. Sela thought of Gera's steadier breath, of nutrient packets set gently on the ground instead of forced down throats, of Dr. Park speaking broken Lyran just to say no harm. Captain Vorik would call it treason. Sela called it real. I'll help, she said. The next 72 hours were the strangest of her life. She worked beside Dr. Park in the medical tent, translating anatomy and terms, explaining Lyran dual heart physiology and filament stress responses, rewriting treatment protocols into forms Lyran clinicians would recognize. She learned Terran medicine was both cruder and sharper than she'd assumed. They lacked bioelectric knitters, but their pharmacology was astonishing. They treated conditions Lyran doctors dismissed as weakness or fate. They had names for invisible wounds. Late one night, Dr. Park paused, fingers hovering over a tablet. My brother died in Sable Passage, she said quietly. He was a reactor tech in the medical corps, pacifist. Only joined because it didn't require weapons. He died trying to stabilize a station your ships hit. I'm sorry, Sela said, and was surprised by how inadequate it felt. Doctor? Park studied her. Are you? Sela swallowed. I think I'm tired of being sorry. I've been sorry since I was old enough to understand what war means. Sorry doesn't stop anything. Dr. Park leaned back. Then what stops it? I don't know, Sela admitted. Maybe someone chooses not to keep feeding the machine. The morning of repatriation arrived the way all mornings arrived on Reinhold 2. Grey, cold, relentless. In the central yard, 2 shuttles descended through the clouds, 1 Terran, 1 Lyran. The Lyran vessel settled first, ramp dropping like a mouth. Captain Vorik shoved forward, filaments brightening with something like triumph. "Remember what you saw," he barked to the prisoners. "Remember how they tried to manipulate you with false kindness." Captain Elder Reese cut in. Vorik turned, outraged. "With respect," Reese said, voice calm and carrying, "be quiet." A gasp moved through the crowd. Even the Terran guards shifted, alert. Reese stepped forward, regal despite the worn coat and processing numbers. "I spent 30 years in diplomacy," she said. "I recognize propaganda when I hear it. The Terrans did not torture us. They fed us. They treated us. Some of us needed it badly. They are not saints. And they are not our friends. They've killed our people, and we've killed theirs. But they are not monsters." Vorik's lips curled. "You've been compromised." "I've been paying attention," Reese replied. One by one, prisoners moved to stand beside her. Gara first, then Riven, then Brel, then others. Not all, but enough that Vorik's certainty wavered into fury. "You'll regret this," he snapped. "I'll file reports, collaboration charges. Your careers." "My career ended when I got captured," Reese said mildly. "What I'm doing now is retirement planning." Colonel Hale stepped between Vorik and the cluster. "Boarding begins in 5 minutes," he announced. "Any prisoner proceeding to the Lyran vessel, line up at the ramp. Any prisoner requiring additional medical consultation, report to the medical tent." Sela felt the opening for what it was, an exit that didn't need to be spoken aloud. John appeared at her side, shaking. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Sela said. "But I'm more scared of going back to pretending certainty is safety." Together, they walked toward the medical tent. 3 hours later, the shuttles lifted. 147 Lyran prisoners departed for the neutral station and the custody of the councils that had sent them to war. 12 remained. Not officially, Asylum Hale was blunt that such decisions lived in distant offices, buried under politics, but extended medical observation was within his authority, and the 12 who requested it all, coincidentally, had conditions that justified remaining under Terran care while paperwork crawled forward. Sela sat in Dr. Park's office, filling out forms that asked impossible questions: preferred climate, training, and skills, dietary restrictions, whether she had allergies to Terran foods. "You know this guarantees nothing," Dr. Park said gently. "War could resume. Your council could demand your return. 100 things could go wrong." "I know," Sela said. "So why stay?" Dr. Park asked. Sela looked out the window. In the yard, John and Riven sat on a bench sharing a nutrient packet, laughing at something private and ridiculous, laughing an actual sound of relief, not hysteria. "Because 3 weeks ago," Sela said, "a Terran officer told me to open my coat. And I was so certain I knew what it meant that I almost missed the truth." She set the stylus down. "I knew everything about Terrans except the one thing that mattered." I knew their wars, their crimes, their old horrors. I didn't know they would check prisoners for malnutrition. I didn't know they would spend a night stabilizing an elderly woman's hearts. Just because she was sick, I didn't know a doctor would learn broken Lyran to tell frightened captives they were safe. Her mouth pulled into a small, astonished smile, like she'd discovered an extra color hiding in gray. I want to know what else I missed, Sela said. And I can't learn it if I run back into the comfort of hating from a distance. Dr. Park was quiet for a moment. Then she slid Sela's cup closer and refilled it with coffee. It still tastes like burned soil, Dr. Park warned. I think I'm developing a taste for it, Sela said. Dr. Park's laugh was soft and surprised. That might be the bravest thing you've said. They sat in a quiet that felt unfamiliar and safe to former enemies who hadn't yet decided what came next. The door cracked open and Jun leaned in, grin bright enough to make her filaments shimmer. Riven wants to know, Jun announced, if Terrans really eat something called pizza, or if she mistranslated the mess menu. Sela blinked, then felt laughter rise like air returning to lungs. They really do, she said, flatbread, with melted cheese and toppings. Jun's grin widened. Because she's been staring at the picture for 15 minutes, and I think she's in love. Sela laughed. Dr. Park laughed. Outside, the clouds hung low, and the war continued somewhere. Beyond them ships and treaties and accusations grinding on. But here, on this cold detention moon, 12 people had made a small, unannounced choice to step into uncertainty instead of marching back into the prison of absolute hatred. Sela took a sip of terrible coffee and decided that being naive, that's what it was, might not be the worst thing a person could be. After all, she'd been certain once, and she'd been wrong.